The diner was half empty that night, the overhead bulbs flickering like they were just as tired of trying as I was. I sat in my usual booth at Café Concord, tucked between Gate 12 and the long-forgotten newspaper stand in Chicago's Union Station. For the 52nd night in a row, I ordered the same thing: black coffee, rare burger, no sides, routine, predictable, safe. I didn't expect change. Hell, I didn't even hope for it anymore. That's when he walked in. The man looked like he'd stepped out of a different world. Tailored overcoat, polished shoes, and the kind of presence that made people instinctively sit up straighter. He didn't glance at the menu. He didn't even stop at the counter. He walked straight to my booth, nodded like we were old friends, and sat down across from me without asking. I blinked. "Can I help you?" I asked, more confused than annoyed. He smiled, slow and deliberate. "You've been winning," he said, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. I stared at him, trying to decide whether he was crazy or just mistaking me for someone else. I was flat broke, sleeping above Alhambra, living off diner coffee and Craigslist hope. Winning? I almost laughed, but something about his eyes made me stop. They weren't mocking, they were certain, like he knew something I didn't. He slid a plain white card across the table. No logo, no company name, just a phone number. "Call when you're ready," he said, standing. "You've already passed the test." And just like that, he walked out, leaving me with cold coffee, a silent question, and the first spark of curiosity I'd felt in months. 3 months earlier, I had a corner office, a product on the verge of revolutionizing freight logistics, and a fiancé who said I was the most dependable man she'd ever known. In less than 90 days, I lost all three. It started with my business partner, Travis Monroe, a friend I'd known since undergrad and trusted like a brother. Together, we launched Sable Route, a logistics optimization startup designed to help nonprofits deliver supplies to remote areas faster and cheaper. We pitched, we coded, we bootstrapped our way into a beta deal with a major aid organization. Then, Travis disappeared. So did $320,000, 0 cents in development funds. I was left holding the legal liability, and worse, his silence. One day he was sending me mock-ups for the mobile interface. The next, radio silence and a flagged wire transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands. That was when everything began to unravel. My fiancée Julia had been patient at first, supportive, but once the lawsuits started rolling in and my inbox turned into a graveyard of job rejections, her patience wore thin. She said she needed space to find herself. What she meant was she found a Delta pilot named Eric, and I was no longer left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter, even took the dog. After that, the eviction notice came like clockwork. I moved into a weekly rental above a laundromat on the south side, a place that smelled like mold and bleach and broken dreams, but I never let myself go. Every morning, I shaved, I ironed my shirt, I walked to the library like it was an office, and sent out resumes like they were gospel. And every night, I went to Café Concord. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find there. Maybe a bit of silence that didn't echo, or just the dignity of habit in a world spinning off its hinges. I didn't know it then, but every choice I made in that collapse was being watched and judged. Every morning, I woke at 6:15 to the hiss of the laundromat vents and the metallic slam of dryers below. My rented room was barely bigger than a supply closet, but I treated it like a barracks. Neatly folded clothes, alarm set with military precision, toothbrush placed parallel to my razor. It was all part of the quiet war I was fighting, the war to not disappear. I dressed in one of my 3 remaining button-downs, polished my shoes even though nobody noticed, and headed to the public library downtown. That was my battlefield. While others scrolled for entertainment, I scrolled job boards, filled out forms, customized cover letters, and emailed resumes into the digital void. I tracked every application on a spreadsheet like a general mapping a siege. 2 callbacks in 7 weeks, both dead ends. But I kept going. By evening, I made the same walk back to Union Station, cutting through the same street corners where the same vendors sold the same knockoff watches and stale pretzels. Cafe Concord was my ritual, my last line of defense against despair. I always sat in booth 9, the one with the cracked faux leather cushion and the flickering pendant light. The waitress, Sophia, stopped asking for my order. After weeks, she'd just nod and say, "Black coffee, rare burger, no sides," and I'd smile like it was the only conversation I had all day. Maybe it was. There was something sacred about that booth, not because it offered comfort, but because it demanded presence. I never brought a phone, never stared at a screen, just coffee, silence, and the inner reminder that I was still here, still standing, still fighting. No one saw the effort it took to maintain that small shred of self, not to laugh, not to pity, but to understand, to measure, to see if I'd keep my spine straight when no one was looking. And every night I returned to that booth, I was answering a question I didn't even know was being asked. I kept the card in my wallet, tucked behind expired business receipts and old train tickets, half convinced it was just a strange hallucination from a hunger-starved brain. But 4 days after our encounter, curiosity finally overpowered cynicism. I dialed the number. 1 ring, then a calm, familiar voice. "Mr. Mercer, I was hoping you'd call." No introductions, no wasted words. He gave me an address in the West Loop and said only, "Don't be late." The building was nondescript, gray stone, no signage, just a steel door with a coded keypad. When I arrived, it opened before I knocked. A young woman in tactical slacks and a black turtleneck greeted me with a quiet, "This way." I followed her through a narrow corridor and into what looked like a cross between a tech startup and a military operations center. Monitors, maps, desks with cables and glowing screens. Not a soul looked up. In the middle of it all stood Everett Langston, the man from the diner, dressed now in a charcoal blazer, his silver hair glinting beneath recessed lights. "Welcome to the Langston Group," he said, offering a firm handshake. "We handle problems that don't belong on the front page." He gestured to a chair inside a glass-walled briefing room overlooking the floor. "What we do here requires more than skill." I sat down, still unsure if I was dreaming. Everett looked at me like he'd already read the last chapter of my story. "You've already been through hell," he said, "and you kept your soul intact. That's why you're here." Then he slid a folder across the table. My resume was on top. Beneath it, blueprints, dossiers, and something that looked very much like a job offer. Everett didn't ask me the usual questions. No, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" or "What are your biggest weaknesses?" Instead, he opened a slim tablet and turned it toward me. On the screen was a still frame from Cafe Concord on me, sitting in booth 9, staring out the window, steam curling from my coffee cup. Then another. "We don't just recruit talent," Everett said. "We observe character, quiet patterns, unpaid moments." I didn't know whether to be flattered or disturbed. He flipped to the next screen. I blinked, speechless. "You think no one noticed the stand you took?" But we did. In fact, we were counting on it. He leaned forward. "Langston Group partners with various government and civilian entities on confidential humanitarian tech. Our latest project involves a real-time supply chain model for refugee response, a system to deliver food, water, and medicine across war zones with zero tolerance for corruption." He paused, letting the weight settle. "We've seen engineers with perfect credentials crumble under pressure. But you stayed ethical." I shifted in my chair, unsure if I was being offered a job or recruited into a secret society. "Why me?" I asked, the doubt creeping back in. Everett smiled faintly. Because we don't need someone who's never failed. We need someone who's failed and refused to lose who they were in the process. He tapped the last page in the folder. A formal contract. 6-figure salary, on-site apartment, non-disclosure clause thicker than a law book. You've already been tested, Caleb, he said. Now we want you to build something no one else has the guts to try. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. I wasn't just being hired, I was being seen. 2 weeks later, I moved into a minimalist apartment tucked above Langston Group's downtown operations hub, a place where glass walls and clean lines met the hum of relentless purpose. The mattress was firm, the kitchen barely stocked, but it felt like sanctuary. Gone were the rusted pipes and coin-me-opolated shower stalls of the laundromat. My team was small, 5 engineers, a systems architect, and me. We were tasked with building an autonomous logistics network to serve unstable regions in Eastern Africa. It wasn't just code and drones, it was urgency, ethics, lives on the line. The work was relentless. 12-hour days blurred into 16, but for the first time in months, I wasn't just trying to survive, I was building again. And this time, not for investors or headlines, for impact, for redemption. My past didn't haunt me here, it qualified me. When I spoke about failure modes or contingency mapping, no one asked why I wasn't still running Sable Route. They already knew, and they respected the fact that I'd kept my moral compass even while everything else crumbled. Some nights, when the office lights dimmed and the others filed out, I stayed behind. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The quiet hum of servers, the glow of real-time supply maps, the knowledge that somewhere a child might get insulin tomorrow because of a line of code I'd written, that was enough. That was everything. On Fridays, I found myself drifting back to Cafe Concord. Booth 9 was still there, the lights still flickering. Sophia, ever unbothered, would smile and bring me my usual without asking. "You look better," she said one night, setting down my coffee. I smiled. "Feels like I finally came up for air." She nodded knowingly, like maybe some people don't just serve coffee, they serve reminders of who you were when no one else remembered. I thought I'd been hired to lead a logistics project, an opportunity to rebuild, to matter again, but Everett had only given me part of the truth. One evening, just after a successful system test, he called me into his office. The glass walls were tinted, the hallway outside dark. On the screen before him was a dossier with my name and Travis Monroe's. My stomach dropped. "You need to know the full reason why we chose you," Everett said, his voice lower than usual. "What happened with Sable Route? It wasn't just embezzlement, it was sabotage." He tapped the screen. "After Travis disappeared, fragments of your prototype code began surfacing in systems used by a foreign cyber intelligence ring. Someone was using your startup collapse as a cover to embed spyware into humanitarian supply chains." I sat in stunned silence. All this time, I thought my partner had simply robbed me blind, but he had been part of something far more calculated, and I had been the unwitting firewall that kept it from spreading. "You were the anomaly," Everett continued. "You didn't sell the code, you didn't compromise, you didn't fold under pressure. That's what made us look closer. That's what made us realize you weren't just a decent man, you were in the way of someone else's bigger plan." The supply chain system I was now leading, it wasn't just about saving lives, it was bait. Langston Group had embedded digital tracers within the system, designed to activate if compromised. "You're not just building a solution," Everett said, "you're helping us find out who's still trying to weaponize." I leaned back, the weight of it all settling on me. The late-night surveillance, the buyout offer I thought was a fluke, the job offer that felt too good to be true. It was all connected, but I wasn't angry, not anymore. because for the first time in a long time, I understood the pain had a purpose. Everett looked at me, calm and certain. You weren't just hired, Caleb. You were vetted. And now, I left his office that night with a new kind of clarity. Not just about the mission, but about who I'd become through the fire. 2 weeks after Everett revealed the true stakes, the trap was set. We launched our humanitarian logistics system live in a test region, northern Kenya, under the guise of a standard deployment. Within 72 hours, one of our tracer packets lit up, signaling unauthorized access. Just like that, the fish took the bait. The breach originated from a masked IP address in Prague, routed through servers in Taiwan, but Langston Group's cyber division had anticipated the moves. Within hours, digital forensics traced the intrusion back to a shell company. I sat in the war room as Langston's team layered image after image, money trails, data logs, hidden correspondences. It was all there. Evidence that Travis had sold Sable Route's dormant code to a black market cyber cartel specializing in corrupting humanitarian infrastructure. My startup hadn't just failed, it had been targeted. The Department of Justice took it from there. With Langston's help, the evidence was fast-tracked, indictments issued, extraditions prepared. Travis was arrested, crossing into Sweden, still under the radar, and still pretending to be someone else. I was cleared of any legal debris from Sable Route. My name, finally, was no longer just tied to failure. The media never heard a word about what really happened. No headlines, no viral vindication. But that night, Everett poured me a glass of Glenlivet in his office and raised it without a word. I didn't need a toast. I just nodded, the moment heavy and silent. Justice had come not with noise, but with precision. And for once, I wasn't the guy holding the broken pieces. 1 year to the day since I first sat across from Everett Langston in Cafe Concord. I returned to Booth 9, but this time I wasn't alone. My team from Langston Group joined me, fresh off a week of late-night coding marathons and real-world deployment wins. We called it a strategy dinner, but really it was just an excuse to celebrate over burgers and black coffee. Of course, the flickering light above the booth still hadn't been fixed. Somehow, that felt right. It reminded me of the version of myself who once sat here in silence, unsure if I mattered to anyone. The man who ordered out of routine, not hope. Who kept his shoes polished, even when the only person who'd notice was the one pouring his coffee. Sophia brought out dessert on the house and smiled as she placed the plates down. "Told you this booth was lucky," she said with a wink. I couldn't help but grin. She'd watched me during the worst stretch of my life, and now she was seeing what came after. Across the table, my team laughed about a bug we'd just crushed. I watched them, each one of them, a quiet warrior in their own way, and felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Peace. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was whole. I had rebuilt something stronger than my resume. I had rebuilt me. And the world hadn't handed it to me. I had earned it, inch by inch, night by night. Not with grand gestures, but with discipline, with kindness, with integrity that held even when no one was watching. I raised my coffee in a silent toast to the man I used to be. He saved my life. And I finally understood he'd been winning all along. Not all victories come with applause. Some happen in silence, when no one's watching, when everything hurts, and when walking away would be easier than standing tall. For a long time, I thought I was losing my company, my home, my relationship, my future. But now I see that I was simply being refined. I wasn't being broken, and every time I tipped my waitress with a smile, showed up clean-shaven to a hopeless interview, or walked into that diner with my shoulders squared despite the weight on them, I was passing a test I didn't even know I was taking. This story isn't about luck or second chances falling from the sky. It's about what happens when you hold on to your integrity even when you feel invisible. When you keep doing the right thing with no audience, no reward, and no clear reason except that it's who you are. That's what someone saw in me, and that's why my life changed. Not because I chased redemption, but because I lived it. If you're in the thick of it right now, sitting in your own booth 9 somewhere, wondering if anyone sees you, know this: someone might already be watching you win. And even if they're not, your quiet courage is changing you, sharpening you, preparing you. You're not falling behind, you're rising unseen. Keep going, keep showing up. Your story isn't over. The world just hasn't caught up to your victory yet. The greatest battles are often the ones no one sees. Caleb Mercer didn't win because life gave him second chances. He won because he kept showing up when everything in him wanted to disappear. This story is a reminder that dignity isn't loud, integrity doesn't beg for attention, and real strength shows up in silence. When the world took everything from Caleb, and that made all the difference. We all have our booth 9 moments, dark seasons where we feel forgotten, unworthy, or stuck. But as Caleb's story shows, every quiet bit of resilience is shaping who you become. Someone might already be watching you win, and if not, do it anyway, because that's where real victory lives. If this story inspired you or reminded you of your own strength, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share. Help us spread stories that celebrate character over comfort, resilience over recognition, and the quiet strength that lives in all of us. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter, because someone out there needs to hear this today.